The most ridiculous and arguably best devil fruit in the series of One Piece has been awakened by Luffy, our protagonist, and he has dubbed this awakening Gear 5 and said it was nothing less than his peak. In this video, I'm going to be explaining in detail this awakened Gear 5 and all of its powers and how strong Luffy is with it, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Channel Parking Within, and smash that like button if you enjoy seeing One Piece videos like this one and want to keep them coming. Don't forget to make sure you've joined the Nakama by subscribing and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss future One Piece videos and updates. And now, without further ado, let's jump into the hypest awakening, the final gear that let Rubber David beat Dragon Goliath. So Gear 5 is teased at the end of chapter 1043, where we see a Luffy that should be out of commission smile and the top of his face looks like it's melting. We're even told by Zunesha that Joy Boy has returned, adding even more significance to this awakening and fruit. During chapter 1044, we learn more, thank you to the elders for shedding some light on the sun god. At Marijoa, it's asked, and I quote, "So we've lost an elite agent and made Kaido angry. What was the point?" End quote. And then Saturn, the one who is currently coming with Kizaru to attack Egghead, says, "What if I told you that there was a potential future that would make us beg for this outcome? It is always better to eliminate dangerous variables." Clearly, he understands the threat here, so I like how Oda made him accompany Kizaru to stop Vegapunk and now Luffy. Then another elder says, "In every era, the world government has attempted to recover the Gum Gum fruit, and not once has it ever succeeded. For 800 years, it is as though the devil fruit is trying to escape our grasp, and it very well might be. Zoan fruits contain a will of their own, and this particular fruit has the name of a god. The other name of the Gum Gum fruit is the Zoan type human fruit mythical model, Nika." End quote. So a lot to unwrap there. Obviously, the big reveal that the Gomu Gomu no Mi is not a paramecia but actually a mythical zone is huge in and of itself. Then there's the fact that zones have a will of their own and can even evade the world government. The way I take this is not that the zone takes over the personality of the user with its own, but rather that it seeks out compatible people with already similar wills. It would explain why the Inu Inu no Mi model Okuchi no Makami ended up going to Yamato despite being in Kaido's control, because Yamato wanted to protect Wano, and obviously so did the wolf god mythical zone, which is said to be the guardian deity of Wano. It also explains why after the conflict Yamato stays, because why would a guardian deity of Wano pick someone who would leave and not stay where they can continue to protect Wano? This also explains why, as we're about to see, Luffy is still Luffy after awakening, and it's not one of those "I'm not Luffy, I'm the sun god Nika" situations, and thank God for that. We then see a silhouette of Luffy's new form in the sky as the elders continue to explain, and I quote, "Possessing a body with the properties of rubber and fighting in whatever way he fancies, bringing smiles to the faces of the people, the warrior of liberation also known as Nika the sun god. Awakening brings his rubbery body greater physical strength and freedom. It is said that in all the world there is no power more ridiculous." End quote. So we got even more to unpack here. The fruit is associated with the body possessing the properties of rubber, which explains why the government wanted to hide the truth and decided to do it by lying and saying it's just a rubber paramecia fruit. This is the only instance of name changing we know of, but it does open the gateway for perhaps other fruits to be mislabeled. I'm personally looking at you, Blackbeard, and your Darkness God fruit. Anyways, next we're told that the mythical zone is a warrior of liberation. Makes sense for someone like Luffy who loves freedom and ends up freeing people wherever he goes. And like it says here, he also puts smiles on people's faces. So I know it's not super relevant, but man, doesn't this just make the elders look like the worst? Like, they want to unironically destroy a guy who brings freedom and smiles wherever he goes. Like, they won't even try to frame it like they're not the bad guys here. That's just something that stood out to me. We're informed that Luffy's body will get power and freedom boosts, aka his fists will pack more punch, and his body will be, to put it mildly, impossibly flexible and adaptable, but more importantly that it is the most ridiculous power in the world, and that it can let the fighter fight in whatever way he fancies. Now that's the legend at least, but if true, that means Luffy can do anything, even the impossible. He's only limited by his imagination. Now the phrasing most ridiculous power might want to make us jump to the conclusion that this means he has the strongest, best fruit. And that wouldn't be a surprise for a god fruit that the government fears more than any other, clearly. But there is also the possibility that they just mean the most absurd power, and another fruit may well hold the other titles. But either way, as we'll get into, the power and mastery of Haki more than devil fruits determines the strongest. So I don't think we need to get bogged down by what's the strongest devil fruit, since it depends so much on the user. Anyways, back to awaken Luffy for now, and he says, "Ooh, I can do everything I wanted to do. I think I can fight a bit longer. My heartbeat sounds so funny. This is the pinnacle of what I can do. This is Gear 5. End quote. Now tell me honestly, in the comments, are there any words more hype? Gear 5 was hyped up for so long, and I gotta say, Oda really delivered here. Then we finally stop hearing about the awakening and we start seeing what Gear 5 can do against Kaido. Even before he grabs Kaido's giant dragon form like it's a snake toy, multiple beast pirates start fainting because of the Conqueror's Haki coming off of Luffy in this form. So already we see that in this form Luffy can make his fist big enough to wrap around Kaido's giant dragon body. He then has the strength to pull him up like he really is dealing with a snake toy. He does a Popeye flex to show how strong he is, and then spins the before godlike terrifying looking mythical Zoan, making him look like he's in a cartoon. Kaido's eyes popping out and everything. Luffy smashes Kaido into the ground over and over again, and before this form, it was definitely hard to picture anyone doing something like this to Kaido's gigantic dragon form. Then we see something very interesting. Kaido launches a blast breath at Luffy, and Luffy shows he can manipulate his surroundings. He turns the ground into rubber and then lifts it up to bounce Kaido's blast breath back at him. Some people in the comments think that this makes Luffy's fruit a paramecia and mythical Zoan, but let's remember that Marco's mythical Zoan also has Logia-like properties, but that doesn't make it a Logia, so I think it's the same thing here. Luffy's fruit is in fact a mythical Zoan, and some of the aspects of its awakening, like being able to affect his surroundings, happens to be similar to a paramecia awakening. That's the cool thing about mythical Zoans in particular, and why they're the best in my opinion. They have multiple abilities, and they can be similar to any fruit type and even multiple fruit types depending on the myth in question. Kaido himself gets confused because of all of this, saying, given that you're transferring your powers to other things, I suppose I can interpret this as the awakening of your paramecia powers, but something doesn't add up. Body transformations like that are the trademark of Zoan powers. The fight continues and Luffy continues to do crazy and pretty much impossible things, like it's Looney Tunes. I've also heard this multiple times referred to as Toon Force, aka an ability that allows cartoon characters to bypass laws of nature in order to achieve impossible feats for comedic effects. Kaido swallows Luffy, but Luffy just keeps beating up Kaido from the inside, first through zigzag patterns and then by ballooning up to a ridiculous degree. And then Kaido asks, what's wrong with me? My body isn't made of rubber. So Luffy's powers now let him not only manipulate inanimate objects and himself, but other characters as well. Absolutely insane stuff. Then Luffy sees two lights that happen to be Kaido's eyes. And in the most ridiculous move to date, he puts his hands through them and grabs Kaido's nose, while Kaido's eyeballs stretch with Luffy's arms, creating some kind of weird dragon eye gloves. Finally, Kaido expels Luffy from his body since trying to eat him is clearly not gonna work. And if you noticed, here's another interesting aspect to Luffy's powers. They might actually be helping his opponent in certain situations. Think about it. Luffy could have torn through Kaido's eyes if they weren't so stretchy, and that obviously would have been a devastating blow. I totally agree that that would have been anticlimactic and wouldn't have felt like One Piece at all, but just something that crossed my mind. Either way, it looks like Luffy is trying to have fun with this fight, and so it's arguable that he wasn't even trying to finish it off there. Luffy then makes himself an absolute giant that even towers over Kaido's dragon head in the panel. It's crazy how easy it is for him to do something like that in this form. He then proceeds to embarrass the living Yonko with the highest bounty by using him in his big bad dragon form as, get this, a jump rope. Luffy then takes the full brunt of a blast breath, and he looks comedically like he just got barbecued. But he quickly reverts to his normal Gear 5 appearance and proceeds to fly by running through the air, leaving a trail of fire no less. Kaido, now in his hybrid form, lands one of the most epically named attacks in One Piece, Conqueror of Three Worlds, Ragnaraku. and Luffy's giant head comedically stretches, breaking through the roof and scaring the beast pirates below. His Toon Force powers seem to be overflowing and affecting those around him, as even people like Law and Kid have their eyes pop out in cartoonish fashion. I really look forward to seeing how this part will be animated in the anime and how cartoonish they will make it. Then all of a sudden Kaido says Luffy has reached his limit, and accordingly Luffy's face starts drooping. So he looks like an old man and his hair has turned black again. He admits he's all tuckered out. Nevertheless, Luffy says this can't end yet and re-enters his Gear 5 form. Kaido says careful or you'll die, and Luffy says you actually think I'm afraid of that. Luffy says come on Heart, hit that beat, and then he is back to being full of energy as he says yeah, that's the sound. So we see here that even when tuckered out, Luffy in this form can use his heartbeat to keep fighting. Now I won't enter the long-term consequences of this for the time being, since it would just be speculation at this point, but it's pretty crazy for now at least that he can just refuel himself like that by telling his heart to beat in a specific way. Then we see the insane growth of Luffy's stretchiness in this form. Kaido hits him with his spiked club. For Luffy, blunt things weren't a problem, but sharp things were. Now though, his face impossibly wraps around the spikes, and there doesn't even seem to be a pinch of blood to signify the penetration of the skin by the spikes. Obviously, a sword could still be a different story compared to spikes, but Luffy has potentially come a long way to overcoming a big weakness in this form. Kaido then smashes Luffy into the ground, but Luffy dampens the effect of the hit by not only stretching his own body to ridiculous degrees, but also by making the ground beneath him like a sort of trampoline. As you can imagine, that would really dampen the force of even the hardest swing. As Luffy spins his fist around like a helicopter, Kaido wonders what does all of this mean. He says Luffy turns all white, he uses the colors of armament and the Supreme King, and can transfer his powers to other things. I've never seen such freewheeling combat before, end quote. Kaido says aloud, there's no one in the world who can defeat him, but just then it looks like Luffy's fist goes straight through Kaido's head. Another thing that, if it happened without Toon Force, should end someone. But Kaido's head is intact afterwards. It is made clear though that there's hockey infused with Luffy's punches, and so it nonetheless hurt Kaido a lot. Luffy then asks Kaido, isn't this fun, showing he's having a blast himself. We then again get Zunesha, recognizing Luffy's rhythm, the rhythm that came with Awakening, as that of Joy Boys. He says he can feel that fate is at work. So again, it asks us to remember that this fruit is tied to the old Joy Boy, and that it's tied to the prophecy, the one Roger was too early for. Luffy is the new Joy Boy that has been prophesized. Now yes, I know a lot of people don't like stuff being fated to be, but nonetheless it's important to note in a discussion of this fruit. The fruit seems to be wrapped up in the fate of the world, and thus so is Luffy by extension. It's probably why the government fears it more than any other fruit as well. But don't worry, Oda balances this later on, as we'll see. And now back to the fight where Luffy again tells Kaido that he'll surpass him and become the king of the pirates. Kaido for his part is glad Luffy still has sass, and says awakening is what happens when your mind and body catch up to your powers. And those are certainly ridiculous powers, end quote. On a side note, doesn't that make Kaido sound like an expert on awakening and like he has awakened himself? Just some food for thought. Then Luffy launches many quick punches which again stretch Kaido's body to a ridiculous degree. Kaido launches razor sharp air blades at Luffy, and the dude pulls up the lower half of his body so his legs stretch and the blades go between his legs without even touching him. Luffy continues to do crazy thing after crazy thing. He catches a lightning bolt and like Zeus himself, he launches it at Kaido, calling the move Gum Gum Lightning. Dude thinks he's a Nell now. Kaido dodges, lands a hit on Luffy, and then Luffy uses another lightning bolt like a pole to catch himself and spin around. He uses it to propel himself and attack Kaido, only for Kaido to smash him in the face with his spiked club. Kaido says abilities alone cannot conquer the world. The world is convenient that way. Roger didn't have any fruit powers, because only Haki can transcend all, end quote. And there is the rub I've been talking about. Oda wants to make it clear, yeah, Luffy's fruit power is the most ridiculous, but without Haki Mastery, even the best fruit power isn't a big deal. In fact, the one who was Pirate King and conquered the world, so to speak, before, didn't have any devil fruit. So it's Oda's way of telling us, yeah, I know I gave Luffy a super special fruit, but that doesn't mean Luffy is automatically the strongest because of it. No, Haki is more important, and Luffy can still improve in that regard, even if Gear 5 really is his final form and his peak when it comes to the Devil Fruit, as Luffy says it is. The only problem for Kaido is, as we're about to see, Luffy is no slouch when it comes to Haki Mastery either. For now, Kaido hits Luffy and sends him flying. Luffy grabs onto Kaido's skin like he's wearing a shirt, another Toon Force detail. Kaido wants Luffy to let go of him, but Luffy doesn't. Kaido tries to free himself with a spike club, but it doesn't work, and then he assumes that Luffy still has a weakness to cutting attacks, and sends more air blades at him in his dragon form. And some do make Luffy bleed, but he's still holding on. Kaido launches a blast breath, and again Luffy looks barbecued, but he still holds on. He finally says, I'm gonna put an end to all of this, as his giant fist comes from the clouds, and the fist is so big, it even makes it look like Kaido's giant dragon form could be squished by this all-powerful fist. That fist can even destroy Onigashima, that's how unbelievably big it is. This is when Kaido uses his secret technique, Flame Dragon Torch. His whole body is set ablaze, making him all the bigger. Kaido says Luffy's fist will melt before it touches him. Luffy explains that the old man taught him to do that without touching, referring to advanced Haki, aka Ryo. He says he'll smash Kaido all the way down to the bottom of hell. The two enter the final clash. As Luffy says he'll create a world where his friends can eat as much as they want, his Haki breaks through and Kaido is sent flying deep into the earth. Now, as usual, after an epic fight and as expected after beating the so-called strongest creature in the world with the highest active Yonko bounty, Luffy is exhausted and faints, and Yamato is there to catch him. Nevertheless, Luffy did it. He beat the living Yonko with the highest bounty. What an epic way to show he's Yonko level now, and he used his awakened fruit to do it, but as Oda made clear, it was his mastery over Haki that let him ultimately come out with the win, not just the awakening. So at this point, you might be thinking, what are the consequences of using such an overpowered, ridiculous form? Well, for now at least, doesn't look like there are much. In a couple of chapters, Luffy is conscious again and excited about eating meat. The elders are then furious when they see that Luffy's new bounty poster has been printed with his Gear 5 awakened appearance, and try their best to keep the posters from going out into the world, further showing how much they fear the Sun God fruit. And the myth of the Sun God is that he's seen as a savior, one who will bring the oppressed liberty from the oppressor, and it's understandable why a group that's focused on controlling the world would be so worried about a figure that might be used as an inspirational symbol, one who might encourage more to rise up and seek liberation. That would definitely mean a lot of headaches for the world government, and maybe the eventual toppling of the world government. And what I think is a further strategy to take attention away from Luffy is that they lowballed his bounty big time. They made it seem like Luffy, Kid, and Law as equal partners took down Kaido and Big Mom, and they all get 3 billion berry bounties apiece accordingly. This is ridiculous, and clearly Luffy should get a higher bounty, bigger than Kaido's, for being the one to bring down Kaido, while Kid and Law worked together to bring down Big Mom, who had a lower bounty than Kaido to begin with. But at least Luffy is then proclaimed as one of the 4 Yonko now, and Buggy joins him, but that's the topic for an entirely different video. The important thing is, awakened Luffy is now seen on the same level as Shanks, the man who inspired him to be a pirate in the first place, a pretty epic development. And speaking of Shanks, he's relevant for this video because we know when a Yonko is associated with a devil fruit, it's very special indeed. Blackbeard spent his whole life searching for the Yami Yami no Mi until he got it. Kaido wanted and found the mythical Zoan wolf god fruit because he wanted to take over Wano, and it's the guardian deity of Wano. So with that in mind, we can bet that Shanks understood the significance of the Gomu Gomu no Mi when he brought it to Luffy's village. He knew Roger, and he probably knew more about the prophecy and the sun god than most. So the fact that of all fruits, he was watching over that one shows that it was indeed special from the beginning. And it adds another reason why Shanks would be willing to sacrifice his arm for Luffy, the now user of that special fruit. He sacrificed it, to use his own words, for the sake of the new era. And from what we can gather, according to prophecy, the awakened Sun God fruit user, aka Joy Boy, is a key figure in that new era that Roger was too early for. Now let's jump to chapter 1069, where Rob Lucci reveals his awakened leopard fruit and faces off against Gear 5 Luffy. Thankfully, unlike Goku with Ultra Instinct initially, Luffy doesn't have an issue with entering Gear 5 when he wants to. Many theorize that that might be the case before he used it against Lucci. When Vegapunk sees this form, he says, "Tell me, what is this transformation?" When he's told, "Isn't it the Gomu Gomu no Mi?" the smartest dude in the world says even in the oldest books, there is no such thing as a Gum Gum fruit. Keep in mind, even though we know, our crew still doesn't know about the Gum Gum fruit being the sun god Nika fruit. Vegapunk calls Luffy a beautiful sight, saying he looks just like a god. He expands, saying the foolish and laughable warrior of liberation who brings smiles to all people, also known as Nika, the sun god. He explains it's a name that's been erased from the historical record, but as long as people wish for him, his existence will never truly disappear. All things are brought into this world with hope, even the devil fruits, end quote. The implication, of course, is that people wish for someone who will liberate them, and probably always will. And if they do, the sun god Nika fruit will never cease to exist. Vegapunk further explains that every devil fruit is a possibility for human evolution that someone desired. If only I could be like this, if only I could be like that. All of those powers represent the many branches of the future of humanity. But that unnatural state is loathed by the sea, the mother of nature, a fitting punishment for its sin. Those with powers exist in different dimensions dreamed up by someone else before them, end quote. He adds that it is just his theory, but it's a big info bomb about something present since the beginning of One Piece. And I find the line about the many branches of the future of humanity very intriguing. It also suggests that liberation is one potential path and darkness is another. And even if the clash between freedom and the dawn, represented by Luffy, and darkness, represented by Blackbeard, is fated, perhaps the conclusion is yet to be determined. So that adds some more intensity to their final inevitable clash. Anyways, we see Luffy moving his head and stretching his neck to avoid Lucci's attacks, and then clashing hockey-infused fists with him. At this point, and I hope many of the fan base, knew that Lucci was no match for Luffy. But we were excited to see more of Luffy's fun new powers. We saw Luffy use Gum Gum Mole Pistol, where he punched into the ground and like a mole, it went through the ground and popped up near Lucci to deliver a devastating hit. Luffy during this fight also twists himself up to deliver a Gum Gum Dawn Whip that sends Lucci flying while Luffy himself can't stop spinning. Later, Luffy makes his head so big that he tries to eat Lucci, but Lucci moves out of the way. Luffy then uses a tube to propel himself, delivering a Dawn Rocket, aka a devastating punch to Lucci that stretches the latter's body to an insane level. Lucci, while in pain, can't help but ask himself, where is he getting so much force? Then, when he's done with the fighting, Luffy reverts to his old man saggy form, and him and his people leave using the vacuum rocket. Now, Luffy does recover before too long and is ready when they have to face the Seraphim. With Lucci, he takes on a Seraphim using Gear 4 rather than Gear 5. In the latest chapter 1089, we saw that the Straw Hats in CP0 were victorious. They got the traitor York by her neck, and Lucci is there uncuffed, suggesting that they trust him for now, which is crazy since we got the government forces like Kizaru and even an elder coming. Luffy looks in great condition, eating meat, and it's not obvious yet if he needed Gear 5 at all to overcome the Seraphim. So that's what we saw from Gear 5 so far. It is the awakened Sun God Nika fruit, and we saw Luffy doing crazy, seemingly impossible things with it, but it was also made clear that fruits alone will never be enough, which in its own way makes up for giving your protagonist an overpowered god fruit. Most impressively, Luffy used this form to help beat Kaido, and more recently, he used it to help outclass Rob Lucci, a feat not that impressive after Kaido, but more interesting after Lucci awakened his own fruit at least. We've yet to see Luffy reach his limit, aka an opponent he can't overcome since he awakened his devil fruit, so now we have to wait to see if anyone can still topple the dude who toppled the strongest creature in the world. After this video, I hope you can see how amazing and honestly better mythical zones are. Better than every other fruit category to be sure. And with that in mind, you definitely won't want to miss my recent video about all 12 mythical zone users explained and ranked, link on screen right now, and I'll see you there.